Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. The air in sight Gamma tasted of ozone and recycled water, a sterile tang that had long ago replaced any memory of rain or soil. Kale traced the seam of his glove, his gaze distant, fixed on the chromium door of containment cell 7. For 3 standard years, this had been his universe, 100 meters of polished corridor, the low hum of the station's life support, and the silent, imposing presence of the thing behind the door. He was a warden, a title that lent a veneer of importance to the job of a jailer watching a prisoner who never moved. His past was a different kind of prison, a field of shattered stars and silent screams on Cygnus X-1, but this one was quieter. Here, the ghosts were his own. He performed his duties with the detached efficiency of a man who had left all passion behind with the wreckage of his former life. He checked the energy readings, monitored the atmospheric regulators, and logged the hourly status reports. The logs were always the same, asset stable. No change. The hegemony, in its infinite, bureaucratic wisdom, had designated the being in Cell 7 as an asset. It was a resource, a potential weapon, a mystery to be dissected and catalogued. To Kale, it was just a reason to collect his pay and wait for his contract to expire. He never looked at the primary optical feed. The low-resolution monitor above the console showed a shimmering, vaguely humanoid shape suspended in a gel matrix, but the image felt like a violation. Instead, he relied on the schematics and the life sign indicators. The asset had no discernible biology as the hegemony understood it. It was crystalline, resonant, a creature of light and frequency locked in a stasis field on a forgotten moon at the edge of nowhere. It was said to be the last of its kind, a relic from a war the hegemony claimed to have won decisively. Kale had fought in that war. He knew there were no decisive victories, only varying degrees of loss. The silence of his post was profound, broken only by the rhythmic click of his own patrol route. Left, right, check the seals, turn. The repetition was a kind of meditation, a way to keep the memories at bay. The faces of his squad, the flash of plasma fire, the sudden, shocking silence when a comm link went dead. Here, the silence was controlled, predictable. It was a cold comfort, but it was the only one he had. Disillusionment had settled into his bones like a chronic ache. He followed orders because it was simpler than thinking, simpler than caring. One cycle, during the long watch that bridged the station's designated night and day, a flicker of red caught his eye. It was an anomaly on the tertiary control panel, a place he hadn't seen a warning light in over a year. A diagnostic scroll appeared on the screen. Nutrient feed 7 alpha, power fluctuation. System failure imminent. He stared at it. Protocol was clear. Any malfunction related to the asset's direct support systems required him to log the error, seal the corridor from both ends, and await the arrival of a technical team from the core system, a journey that would take at least 2 rotations. The protocol was designed to protect the station from the asset, not the other way around. If the feed failed, the asset would be starved of the trace elements it needed to maintain its strange, cold life. It would, the manual suggested, simply fade. Kale placed his hand on the console. He could follow the rules. He could write his report, seal the doors, and let the creature in the cell quietly expire. It was the safe, logical, prescribed course of action. It was what the hegemony expected of him. It was what the old Kale, the soldier who followed orders without question, would have done. But the soldier had died on Cygnus, and the man who remained was just tired. He was tired of systems, of protocols, of letting things die because a manual said it was the correct procedure. He looked at the chromium door, at the faint, almost imperceptible vibration it gave off. For 3 years, he had shared this silence with the being inside. It was the only constant in his gray, repetitive existence. He did not know it, could not comprehend it, but he had come to feel a strange, one-sided kinship with its quiet imprisonment. To let it extinguish on his watch because of a faulty power conduit felt like a final, pathetic failure. With a quiet curse, he keyed in his override code. The console beeped a protest, flashing a warning about unauthorized interaction with a Class 1 asset. He ignored it. He bypassed the main circuit and began rerouting auxiliary power from the corridor's lighting grid directly to the nutrient feed. It was a clumsy, temporary fix, a trickle of energy where there should have been a steady flow. It was also a gross violation of a dozen hegemony directives. It was an act of defiance so small it was almost meaningless. He diverted the power. For a moment, nothing happened. The red light on the panel continued to blink. Then, it switched to amber, and finally to a steady, reassuring green. The feed was stabilized. Kale let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He had done it. He had broken the rules for no reason other than a flicker of something he could not name. Compassion? Curiosity? Or maybe just a desire to prove to himself that he was still capable of making a choice. That was when the humming started. It was not the familiar drone of the station, but a new sound, a low, resonant thrum that seemed to vibrate in his teeth. The chromium door of cell 7 began to glow with a soft, internal light. The life sign indicators on his console, usually a flat, steady line, began to pulse in a complex, rhythmic pattern. The asset was awake. Before he could process what was happening, a wave of incandescent blue light erupted from the cell. It did not explode. It bloomed, washing over the corridor in absolute silence. The chromium door did not buckle or break. It simply dissolved, its atoms unwritten from existence. The gel matrix evaporated into a cloud of shimmering mist. And in the center of the cell, where the suspended form had been, a figure now stood. It was tall and slender, its body composed of what looked like woven light, its crystalline structure shifting and reforming with every subtle movement. It had no face, only a smooth, featureless head that tilted as if listening to a sound he could not hear. The station's alarms screamed to life, a cacophony of sirens and automated warnings. Containment breach. Sector Delta. All personnel to lockdown protocols. Kale stood frozen, his hand still on the console. He had not just broken a rule. He had shattered the cage of a god or a demon, and he had no idea which it was. The being of light took a step out of the cell, its feet making no sound on the deck plating. It turned its featureless head toward him. He felt no malice, no threat. He felt only an immense, ancient curiosity, a wave of inquiry that washed through his mind without words. He had made his choice. The consequences were now here. The blare of the alarms was a physical assault, a shriek of metal and synthesized panic that echoed the chaos erupting in Kale's mind. Red claxons bathed the corridor in a hellish, pulsing light, turning the serene blue aura of the crystalline being into a violent violet. His training kicked in, a cold wave of instinct that washed over the initial shock. He was compromised. The station was compromised. He was, by every definition in the hegemony code, a traitor. Heavy blast doors began to descend at the far end of the corridor, their grinding descent a final, damning judgment. His sidearm felt heavy and useless in its holster. What could a pulse pistol do against a creature that had just unmade a meter of solid chromium with a thought? The being, Lyra as he would later come to know her name in silent understanding, took another step toward him. It paused, its radiant form casting his elongated, terrified shadow against the wall. From the station-wide comm, a voice cut through the sirens, sharp and cold as ice. Warden Kale, this is Commander Valerius. You have 60 seconds to surrender. Your unauthorized actions have been logged. Resist, and you will be neutralized with extreme prejudice, Valerius. Of course, it would be Valerius, the commander of the 3rd Fleet's elite Iron Griffins, a man who saw rules not as guidelines, but as sacred texts, and their violation as heresy. Kale had served under him once, briefly. He knew the man's fanaticism. There would be no negotiation. The 60 seconds were not an offer. They were a formality before the slaughter. He looked at the descending blast door, then at the being of light beside him. It had made no move to harm him. It simply stood there, an epicenter of calm in the raging storm of the station's alert. An alliance was not formed. It was necessitated by the sudden, shared reality of their situation. He was her keeper, and now he was her accomplice. They would escape together, or they would be extinguished together in this sterile, metallic tomb. He unholstered his pistol. This way, he said, his voice hoarse, knowing the creature likely did not understand the words but would understand the intent. He pointed down the auxiliary corridor, a service tunnel he knew led to the lower maintenance decks. It was a maze, but it was their only chance. Lyra seemed to comprehend. She moved, not by walking, but by flowing, a river of light that glided over the floor. She followed him without hesitation. The trust was immediate and unsettling. Why would this powerful entity follow the man who had been its jailer? Perhaps it sensed the intent behind his transgression, the flicker of empathy that had started it all. Or perhaps it was simply pragmatic, recognizing him as the only source of knowledge in this alien environment. There was no time to question it. The thud of mag boots echoed from the main corridor. Valerius's troopers were coming. They plunged into the service tunnel, a cramped space filled with pipes and conduits that sweated with condensation. The air was thick with the smell of machine oil and charged particles. Kale moved with a veteran's economy of motion, his pistol held ready, his senses on high alert. Behind him, Lyra's light provided a soft, ethereal illumination, casting strange, dancing shadows on the grimy walls. She was incredibly powerful, yet there was a fragility to her. The way her light flickered when the station's power fluctuated, the way she recoiled from a sudden discharge of static electricity from a faulty junction box. She was not invincible. They reached a junction. A schematic on the wall showed two paths. One led to the shuttle bay, the most direct route off the station. It would also be the most heavily guarded. The other led down to the primary fusion core. Suicide for a human, but for a being of energy? He didn't know. The decision was made for him. A squad of iron griffins appeared at the end of the corridor leading to the shuttle bay, their armor gleaming in the dim light. Target acquired, one of them yelled, and the tunnel was filled with the sharp crackle of pulse rifle fire. Kale shoved Lyra behind a thick coolant pipe and returned fire. His pistol shots were precise, aimed at the unarmored joints of their suits. One trooper went down, clutching his shoulder. But there were 5 of them. Bolts of crimson energy seared the air around him, striking sparks from the metalwork. A shot grazed his side, a line of fire that made him grunt in pain. He was pinned down, his chances dwindling with every shot. He risked a glance back at Lyra. She was not cowering. Her form was coalescing, the light within her brightening, becoming painfully intense. A low hum emanated from her, the same resonant frequency he had heard in the control room, but now it was rising in pitch, becoming a piercing, bone-jarring tone. He saw the troopers falter. They raised their hands to their helmets, stumbling as if struck by a physical blow. The sonic frequency she was emitting was bypassing their armor, attacking their senses directly. It was not a weapon of destruction, but of disruption. It was a chance. As the troopers reeled in confusion, their aim faltering, Kale lunged from behind the pipe. He fired 3 quick shots, not to kill, but to disable. One hit a rifle, sending it spinning from a trooper's grasp. Another struck a knee joint, sending a soldier to the floor. It was enough. He grabbed Lyra's arm. It felt like holding solidified warmth, and pulled her down the other corridor, toward the fusion core. Now, she had saved him. Her strange power had given them the opening he could not have created on his own. In the heart of the chaos, with pulse fire still echoing behind them, a bond was forged. Not of words or understanding, but of mutual protection. He, the broken soldier, had shielded her from the first volley, and she, the silent enigma, had saved him from being overwhelmed. They were no longer warden and prisoner. They were survivors, and their ordeal had only just begun. The escape from the station was a blur of frantic action and shared peril, culminating in a desperate launch in a stolen short-range, or hauler. The small ship bucked and screamed as it tore through the station's magnetic docking clamps, its hull plating groaning under the strain of weapons fire from the pursuing patrol craft. Kale wrestled with the controls, his knuckles white, his wounded side a dull, throbbing fire. Lyra stood behind him in the cramped cockpit, a silent column of light that seemed to pulse in time with the ship's struggling engines. Once they were clear of the station's immediate range, he pushed the sublight engines to their maximum and aimed for the largest of the moon's desolate, crater-scarred continents. They needed to get to ground, to find cover where the ship's heat signature would be lost among the geothermal vents that dotted the landscape. The surface of Site Gamma's moon was a masterpiece of desolation. It was a world of gray dust, jagged rock formations, and a sky the color of bruised slate. A thin, unbreathable atmosphere of nitrogen and argon offered no protection from the relentless bombardment of cosmic rays. They landed the hauler clumsily in the shadow of a massive, wind-scoured mesa, the impact jarring Kale's teeth. He cut the power, and the sudden silence was as vast and intimidating as the landscape outside. For a long while, they just sat there, the adrenaline of the escape slowly draining away, leaving behind a profound sense of isolation. They were fugitives on a dead world. Their journey began on foot. The hauler was too conspicuous, its energy signature a beacon that Valerius's hunters would eventually find. Kale's goal was an old, decommissioned comms relay on the far side of the continent, a relic from the initial survey of the system. It was a long shot, but it might have enough residual power to send a signal, or at least to scan for off-grid shipping lanes they could use to escape the system entirely. The journey would take them through the Ashen Wastes, a region known for its corrosive dust storms and treacherous terrain. The ordeal of the wastes forged their nonverbal language. The environment was a constant, impartial threat. Kale learned to read the subtle shifts in Lyra's luminescence. A soft, steady glow meant she was calm. A rapid, almost frantic flickering warned of an approaching dust storm long before his own senses could detect the change in atmospheric pressure. She, in turn, learned to interpret his physical cues, the tension in his shoulders, the way he scanned the horizon, the grim set of his jaw. He taught her simple hand signals for stop, go, and danger, which she acknowledged with a gentle pulse of light. They shared what little he had. He had salvaged a single water recirculator and a few nutrient-paste packets from the hauler. He would offer her the water, and she would decline with a slow dimming of her light, somehow conveying that she did not need it. He learned that she drew sustenance directly from the ambient energy of the moon, the geothermal heat from below, and the weak stellar radiation from above. She was a part of her environment in a way he could never be. He was a foreign body, fragile and dependent on his technology, while she was as elemental as the rock and light around her. Days bled into one another, marked only by the slow crawl of the distant sun across the sky. During the harsh daylight, they sheltered in caves or the lee of rock formations. They traveled during the long, frigid twilight, the ground crunching under Kale's boots. It was during one of these long marches that they finally reached the abandoned comms relay. It was a skeletal tower of rust and decay, its massive dish pointed like a forgotten question at the star-dusted void. Inside the main control building, the air was stale and thick with dust. Most of the systems were dead, but Kale managed to coax a single console back to life using the ship's emergency power cell. As the screen flickered on, Lyra approached it. She did not touch the controls. Instead, she placed her hand a few centimeters from the screen. A web of light, like lightning captured in glass, spread from her fingertips and flowed into the ancient machine. The screen went white. Then, images began to appear. They were not data scrolls or schematics. They were memories. Her memories. Kale watched, transfixed, as she showed him the truth. He saw a galaxy not of competing empires and contested borders, but of interconnected nodes of life, a vast, silent network of cosmic harmony she called the Great Resonance. Her people, the Resonance, were not warriors. They were tenders, gardeners of the cosmic balance, ensuring the stars burned with predictable grace and that the currents of the universe flowed without disastrous interruption. He saw the hegemony's arrival. Their ships, brutal and gray, tore through the fabric of the resonance like a knife through silk. They did not understand what they were touching. Their hyperspace lanes disrupted the cosmic currents. Their weapons testing created dissonant vibrations that caused stars to age prematurely, planets to shift in their orbits. The hegemony saw these events as natural disasters or hostile acts, and they blamed the mysterious beings they encountered at the heart of these phenomena, the resonance. The war he had fought, the one that had cost him everything, was not a war of liberation or defense. It was a pest extermination. The hegemony was a blind, deaf force, destroying a delicate balance it could not even perceive. He saw Lyra's capture. He saw Administrator Forlag, the architect of the hegemony's expansionist policy, standing over her fallen form, his face a mask of cold triumph. Forlag did not want to destroy her. He wanted to understand her power, to control it, to turn it into a weapon that would solidify his grip on the galaxy. The final image was a projection of Kale himself, fighting on Cygnus X-1, his face young and grim, firing his rifle at shimmering, indistinct shapes he had been told were monsters. He was a tool of the very ignorance and tyranny that had shattered this cosmic peace. The revelation settled in his gut like a shard of ice. His cynicism had been a shield, but it had been born of a lie. He had not been fighting for order. He had been an agent of chaos. For the first time since he had lost his squad, he felt something other than weary resignation. He felt a cold, burning rage. And for the first time, he had a cause. They rested in the shadow of the dead relay tower as the moon's twin, a smaller, pockmarked sphere, rose into the sky. Kale took the opportunity to tend to his wound. The pulse burn on his side was an angry red, inflamed and painful. He carefully applied a thin layer of medigel from his pack, hissing as the cold salve met the raw flesh. Lyra watched him, her light soft and inquisitive. As he finished dressing the wound, he unconsciously flexed his right hand, his gaze falling on the old scar tissue that covered his forearm. It was a latticework of pale, raised lines, a permanent reminder of a plasma grenade that had gone off too close during the final battle for Cygnus. A map of his failure. He felt a gentle touch in his mind, not of words, but of pure inquiry. Lyra glided closer, her featureless head tilting. She extended a hand of light and hovered it over his scarred arm. An image bloomed in his thoughts, a vision of her own crystalline body being struck by hegemony containment fields. He saw fractures appear in her luminous form, dark lines of pain that mirrored the scars on his own skin. He saw the agony of being torn from the great resonance, a feeling like a part of her soul being ripped away. He looked from his old, faded scars to the vibrant, living being before him. They were from different ends of the universe, one of flesh and blood, the other of light and frequency. But they were both survivors. They were both scarred by the same brutal, ignorant force. In that silent moment of shared vulnerability, the last vestiges of his distrust dissolved. She was not an asset or an alien. She was a fellow soldier, a casualty of a war she had never wanted to fight. He was no longer just her protector. He was her ally. The hum of engines ripped through the quiet desolation of the wastes, a sound that was brutally out of place in the ancient silence. Kale scrambled to the top of a rocky outcrop, his optical scanner pressed to his eye. On the horizon, 3 sleek, gunmetal gray assault landers were descending, their forms silhouetted against the sickly sky. They bore the insignia of the Iron Griffins. Valerius had found them. There was no escape. The landers were fast, and the open terrain offered no cover for a long-distance run. Their only chance was to make a stand at an old, abandoned strip mining operation a few kilometers to the north, a place he had noted on the survey maps. It was a maze of canyons and derelict machinery, a defensible position if they could reach it in time. The ensuing battle was a brutal, desperate affair. Valerius's troopers were relentless, moving with the cold, coordinated precision of fanatics. They flushed Kale and Lyra from one piece of cover to the next, pinning them down with overwhelming firepower. Kale fought with a ferocity he hadn't felt in years, the instincts of the soldier he once was taking over. He set traps using unstable mining equipment, used the echoing canyons to mask his position, and made every single shot count. But he was one man against a legion. Lyra was not idle. She moved through the battlefield like a phantom, her powers used not for destruction, but for misdirection and defense. She generated localized energy fields that deflected pulse rounds, created shimmering duplicates of herself to draw enemy fire, and emitted targeted sonic pulses that scrambled the Griffin's comms and targeting systems. She was a force of nature, but Kale could see the toll it was taking. With each use of her power, her light dimmed, her form becoming less solid. She was burning through her energy at an unsustainable rate. They were eventually cornered in the skeletal remains of a massive or processing plant. Valerius himself led the final assault, his silver-inlaid armor a stark contrast to the rust and grime around them. Kale, his amplified voice boomed through the structure. Your resistance is an insult to the uniform you once wore. Surrender the asset, and the administrator may yet show you mercy. There's no mercy in him, Valerius. Kale shouted back, firing a shot that ricocheted off the commander's shoulder plate. Only ambition. The fight was short and savage. Kale managed to disable 2 of Valerius's personal guard before the commander closed the distance, a crackling energy baton in his hand. They fought amidst the ruined machinery, a desperate dance of survival. Kale was skilled, but Valerius was younger, stronger, and fueled by righteous fury. A vicious swing of the baton shattered Kale's pulse rifle, and another sent him stumbling back, his arm numb. Just as Valerius raised the baton for a final, killing blow, the entire structure groaned. Lyra, her light now a faint, flickering candle flame, had focused the last of her strength. She didn't attack Valerius directly. She attacked the plant itself, sending a resonant frequency through its rusted support beams. With a scream of tortured metal, a massive conveyor belt and its housing tore loose from the ceiling and crashed down between them, separating Kale from Valerius in a cloud of dust and debris. It was the opening they needed. They fled through a service tunnel in the back of the plant, leaving Valerius roaring in frustration behind them. They managed to circle back to their hidden, or hauler, its signature masked by the geothermal activity and the chaos of the battle. They lifted off just as the Griffin landers began a systematic, grid-by-grid bombardment of the mining complex, a scorched earth tactic that spoke of Valerius's obsessive rage. As they reached the thin upper atmosphere, a new horror became apparent. A hacked hegemony comms channel, which Lyra had managed to access, crackled to life on the ship's console. It was a fleet-wide broadcast from Administrator Forlag. His face was a calm, placid mask, but his words were terrifying. He declared the entire sector under quarantine due to the bioresonant contagion released by the asset. He had mobilized the entire Third Fleet. His plan was not just to recapture Lyra. It was to perform a systemic sterilization. He was going to burn every inhabited world in the sector, billions of lives, to ensure her power could never challenge his authority. The scale of the threat was suddenly, unimaginably vast. This was no longer about their personal survival. Kale looked at the star chart on the navigator, at the small, green dots that represented populated planets, all of them now under a death sentence. A direct military confrontation was impossible. Their stolen hauler against the Third Fleet was less than a gnat against a tidal wave. They could not outrun the fleet, and they could not fight it. The war was unwinnable. In the quiet of the cockpit, surrounded by the silent, indifferent stars, Lyra showed him the final piece of the puzzle. She projected a new series of images into his mind, more complex and abstract than before. She showed him the Great Resonance not as a network, but as a living entity. And like any living thing, it had a heart, a central regulatory node that maintained its balance. The hegemony's reckless expansion had damaged a lesser node, but the primary one was still intact, though dormant. It was called the Keystone. The original Keystone had been a resonant, an ancient being who had willingly merged its consciousness with the network, becoming its eternal, silent guardian. This being had been shattered when the hegemony first carved their hyperspace lanes through this sector, an act of cosmic vandalism that had thrown everything into chaos. The network was now unstable, bleeding raw energy, which was what caused the celestial disturbances Forlag used as a pretext for his war. A new keystone could be created. The network could be stabilized. The process required a conscious, willing mind to merge with the central node, to become the new regulator. This act would send a wave of pacifying energy through the entire sector, an energy that would harmonize the dissonant frequencies the hegemony used for their advanced power systems and weaponry. It would not destroy the Third Fleet, but it would render it inert, helpless. It would end the war in an instant. But the sacrifice was absolute. The individual would cease to exist in any physical sense. Their consciousness would be subsumed, stretched across the vastness of space and time, becoming a silent, feeling presence that held the universe in balance. It was not death, but it was the end of self. A permanent, lonely vigil. The central node, she revealed, was not in some distant, mystical location. In a stroke of cosmic irony, the hegemony had built its regional command citadel on the planet Keanos directly on top of the dormant nexus, drawn to its immense energy signature without ever understanding its true nature. The solution lay in the very heart of the enemy's power. An impossible choice was presented: to flee and watch a sector burn, or to journey to the enemy's stronghold to commit an act of ultimate self-annihilation. Kale stared out at the starfield, the weight of billions of lives settling upon him. The path was clear, terrible, and absolute. The silence in the cockpit was a physical presence, heavier than any hull plating. The ship drifted, its engines on minimum, a tiny speck of metal and intention in the infinite dark. The choice Lyra had presented was not a choice at all. It was a destination. Cale's entire life, a long, meandering path of duty, loss, and cynicism, had led him to this single, monumental point. He was a broken soldier from a forgotten war, a man with no future and a past he could not escape. What was the end of one such life, weighed against the survival of billions? He did not wrestle with the decision. The fight had already happened, in quiet increments, over the course of his life. It had happened when he chose to reroute power to a prisoner's cell. It had happened when he stood his ground in a rusted processing plant. The man who would have walked away, the man who believed in nothing but his own survival, had been eroded away by the quiet dignity of the being beside him. All that remained was the soldier, and the soldier understood the nature of sacrifice. His conflict was not whether to do it, but how to face the finality of it. To cease to be Cale, to have his memories, his pain, his few treasured moments of peace, dissolved into a cosmic hum. It was a fear more profound than death. Death was an ending. This was an erasure. He thought of his squad on Cygnus, of their faces before the final push. He had survived when they had not, and for years he had carried the guilt of that survival like a shroud. Perhaps this was the final balancing of the scales. A life for a life. His life for everyone's. He spent what felt like a long time just watching the stars, the same stars he had cursed from the viewport of his barracks years ago. They no longer looked cold and indifferent. He saw them now as Lyra did, as points of connection in a vast, living tapestry. He was not just saving people on planets. He was saving the integrity of the tapestry itself. His purpose, once so small and self-contained, had expanded to the size of the universe. He stood up and moved to the NAV computer. He did not speak. Words were insufficient for what needed to be done. He plotted a course for Kianos, the coordinates for the Hegemony Command Citadel glowing starkly on the screen. It was a one-way trip, and they both knew it. He then went to the small storage locker and retrieved a small, smooth, gray stone he had picked up from the ashen wastes on the moon. It was a simple, solid object, a piece of a dead world that had borne witness to their unlikely partnership. He walked back to Lyra. She had remained perfectly still, her light a soft, melancholic blue. He held out the stone in his open palm. It was a final, tangible gift, a symbol of the world where he had found his purpose. A promise. She did not take the stone. Instead, she raised her hand of light and gently touched his forehead. A wave of profound sorrow, of immense gratitude, and of deep, abiding respect washed through him. There was no pity in her gesture, only a shared understanding of the terrible necessity of his choice. In her mind, he felt an echo of his own name. Cale, spoken with a reverence that humbled him. She accepted his decision. The pact was sealed, not in blood or words, but in a silent exchange of resolve. He would be the sacrifice. She would be the witness. Their arrival at Kianos was an act of calculated audacity. They did not try to sneak past the orbital patrols. Instead, Cale pushed the ore hauler's engines into a controlled overload, turning the small ship into a screaming, incandescent meteor aimed directly at the planet's capital city. He broadcast a jumble of random, high-priority hegemony codes on all frequencies, creating just enough confusion to delay the initial defensive response. It was a chaotic, suicidal plunge designed to get them through the primary defense grid. Minutes before atmospheric entry would have incinerated them, they ejected in the hauler's single, tiny escape pod, its signature masked by the fireball of the larger ship. They landed miles from the Citadel, in the sprawling, polluted industrial zones that fed the pristine capital. From there, they moved through the shadows, two ghosts slipping through the heart of the Empire. The Hegemony Command Citadel was a monument to brutalist architecture, a black, monolithic spire that clawed at the sky, surrounded by layers of security and patrols of iron griffins. Infiltration was a symphony of Cale's tactical skill and Lyra's esoteric abilities. He disabled cameras and patrol drones. She phased them through energy barriers and cloaked their presence from life sign scanners. They moved like whispers through the fortress, descending level by level toward the core. The central command chamber was at the very base of the spire, a vast, cavernous space where Administrator Forlag presided over the war. A massive holographic display dominated the room, showing the Third Fleet moving into position for its systemic sterilization. Forlag sat on a raised command throne, his face impassive as he watched the icons of his ships prepare to unleash genocide. And standing guard before him, a sentinel of unwavering loyalty, was Commander Valerius. Their entrance was not subtle. The doors to the chamber hissed open, and they stepped into the light. The room fell silent. Forlag's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. Valerius, however, smiled. It was a thin, predatory expression. The hunt had come to its conclusion. "Kale," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "You have brought the contagion to the heart of the hegemony." A foolish, final gesture. "We came to end this, Valerius," Kale replied, his hand resting on his pistol. The final battle began. Valerius and his elite guard moved to intercept, their pulse rifles spitting crimson energy. Kale moved to meet them, not to defeat them, but to buy time. He was a dervish of controlled violence, his movements precise and deadly. He was no longer fighting for survival, but for seconds. Every trooper he delayed, every shot he dodged, was another moment for Lyra to do what she needed to do. She ignored the combatants. She flowed toward the center of the room, to a spot on the floor that glowed with a faint, pulsing energy. This was it. The node. The nexus. She began to emit a low, resonant hum, her light intensifying, weaving complex patterns in the air as she prepared the node to receive its new consciousness. Kale fought his way toward Valerius, the two of them meeting in a clash of grim determination. Valerius was faster, stronger, but Kale was fueled by a purpose that went beyond fanaticism. He took a pulse round to the shoulder, the impact spinning him around, but he stayed on his feet. He drove forward, using his own body as a weapon, and managed to disarm the commander. They grappled, a desperate, close-quarters struggle for the fate of the sector. Kale, with a final surge of strength, managed to use Valerius's own energy baton against him, the stunning charge sending the commander collapsing to the deck, unconscious but alive. He was wounded, bleeding, his vision starting to tunnel. But he had bought the time. He turned to see Lyra, her work almost complete. The node on the floor was now a swirling vortex of pure, white light. But Forlag was no longer watching from his throne. The administrator was striding toward Lyra, a compact but powerful disruptor pistol in his hand. "I will not allow a ghost story to undo a lifetime of work," Forlag hissed, his composure finally cracking. "The hegemony is order. I am order." Kale intercepted him. He threw himself in front of Forlag, taking the full force of the disruptor blast in his chest. The pain was absolute, a fire that consumed him from the inside out. He fell to his knees, his strength failing, but he had stopped Forlag. He looked at Lyra, his vision blurring. She pulsed a single, brilliant flash of light, gratitude, farewell, and a promise to remember. With the last of his will, Kale crawled the final few meters to the vortex. He reached the edge of the swirling light. He did not hesitate. He plunged his hands into the energy. The sensation was not pain. It was beyond pain. It was deconstruction. He felt his atoms being unwound, his consciousness stretched thin, pulled apart like thread from a spool. He felt his memories, Cygnus, the sterile corridors of Site Gamma, the feel of a gray stone in his palm, flare into brilliance and then dissolve into the light. He was Kale, and then he was 1,000 points of light, and then he was 1,000,000, and then he was everything. He was the network. He was the resonance. He was the keystone. A wave of pure, silent energy expanded from the citadel on Kianos. It was not destructive. It was a wave of peace, of perfect harmony. It swept through the system, across the sector. On the bridges of the Third Fleet's warships, consoles went dark. Weapon systems powered down. Engines sputtered and went silent. The ships were not damaged, merely inert, their power sources pacified by a frequency they could no longer comprehend. In the command chamber, Forlag stared, his face a mask of utter disbelief, as the holographic display showing his mighty fleet turned from an array of angry red icons to a field of placid green. The war was over, not with a bang, but with a profound, universe-altering silence. Kale was gone. In his place, a silent guardian held the peace. 10 years passed. The sudden, inexplicable failure of the Third Fleet, an event that came to be known as the Keanos quiescence, shattered the hegemony. Deprived of its primary tool of enforcement, the monolithic empire crumbled under the weight of its own oppressive bureaucracy. Systems long held enthralled declared their independence. New alliances were forged, not through conquest, but through mutual interest and a shared desire for a peace they had almost forgotten was possible. The sector, once a battleground, was slowly, cautiously, healing. The worlds that Administrator Forlag had sentenced to death were now thriving centers of this new coalition. Trade and communication flowed freely. The memory of the hegemony's iron fist was fading, replaced by a sense of shared purpose. The peace was not perfect, for no peace ever is, but it was real, and it was enduring. Lyra had become a central figure in this new age. She was no longer a fugitive or an asset, but an ambassador, a teacher. She moved between worlds, her silent, luminous presence a symbol of the new era. She could not speak in words, but she taught the leaders of the new coalition to listen in a different way, to sense the balance of the great resonance, to understand that the universe was not a thing to be conquered, but a delicate web to be tended. She taught them of the resonance, and of the cost of ignorance. On Keanos, the black, brutalist spire of the Hegemony Command Citadel had been dismantled. In its place, in the very center of the capital city, stood a simple, unadorned monument. It was a single, slender spire of polished white stone that seemed to drink the light of the sky. It bore no name, no inscription, no record of battle or victory. It did not need one. Those who knew, knew. Lyra stood before the monument, the citizens of Keanos giving her a wide, respectful berth. The spire hummed with a faint, almost imperceptible energy, a steady, peaceful vibration that calmed the air around it. It was the heart of the new peace, the anchor of the stabilized network. She reached out a hand of light and placed it on the warm stone. She could feel him. Not Kale, the man. Not the wounded soldier or the weary warden. That person was gone. His identity, a single drop of rain, returned to the ocean. But his consciousness, his will, his sacrifice, that remained. It was the quiet, steady awareness that held the network in balance. It was the silent, eternal guardian at the heart of the resonance. He was the stillness in the space between stars, the harmony in the orbits of planets, the unwavering vigilance that kept the chaos at bay. His sacrifice had not been an ending. It had been a transformation. He had traded his small, painful existence for a purpose the size of the galaxy. He had become the peace he had fought to create. Lyra stood there for a long time, a silent communion between the witness and the guardian. His legacy was not written in history books or carved in stone. It was written in the quiet hum of a peaceful universe, in the steady light of the stars that now shone, safe and serene, in the long, quiet night.